Alert! Humans have classified explosive decompression as a creational activity. Commander Zara Kellerman had stared at the same diagnostic screen for 3 hours. Her coffee cold before the proximity alarm shattered the silence on the bridge. Sensors on the USS Defiant had picked something they shouldn't be sensing: a Kethmori rescue ship, emitting distress calls in 17 different languages, all variations of the same terrified message. Captain, her communications officer, Lieutenant Marcus Chen, called out, his voice tense with confusion. "You have to hear this." The bridge was crowded with a babble of unfamiliar voices, but the universal translator managed to work the confusion back into something that resembled English. Whatever came through froze Zara's blood, not because of what was being stated, but because of the sheer terror that was evident in the alien voices. Emergency procedures enacted. Manned ship seen conducting mass death rites. Repeat, human ships are conducting rituals of void walking. All ships maintain a safe distance. Do not intercept. Species categorization. Omega level threat to galactic stability. Zara gazed at her first officer, Commander Alina Vasquez, who was just as confused. Death rituals of reproduction. Lena snarled. What are they freaking saying? The answer was, via a live broadcast relayed by the Kethmori ship. On the main screen, they beheld in grainy footage the civilian ship Aurora's Dream, which had gone missing for 3 days. But what made no sense was what was next. Tiny figures were jumping themselves out of the airlocks of the ship, floating in the null gravity of space with only minimal Lishu EVA suits. "Oh my God," panted the ship's xenobiologist, Dr. Sarah Kim, who had dashed onto the bridge at the commotion. "They think we're breeding by throwing ourselves into space." It was a much more mundane affair, but evidently much more terrifying to the alien onlookers. The Dream had suffered a critical engine loss out in the rim, and her people were conducting emergency repairs. What the Kethmori were observing was not a suicidal ritualistic burst of charges. It was Tuesday. Captain Morrison of the Aurora's Dream had run cargo from the core worlds to the frontier colonies for 15 years. He had trudged through vacuum more frequently than he could ever hope to count, mended hull breaches with prayers and polymer patches alone, and once notoriously effected a 3-hour repair on an EVA during a pirate boarding of his vessel. Explosive decompression was just one of his workplace's hazards, along with paper cuts and mediocre coffee. For Morrison and his crew, but for the Kethmori, whose race had evolved in the repressive depths of a high-pressure ocean world. The very idea of surviving in vacuum was so alien, so fundamentally wrong, that they could only understand it in terms of their own biological science. On their own world, the only situation in which a member of their race would deliberately expose itself to low pressure was at their once-a-lifetime spawning ceremony. A ceremony so sacred and lethal that most of its participants failed to survive. The confusion might have stayed a curious note of xenological studies, had it not been for what followed. 3 days after the initial alarm, the emergency session of the Galactic Council was called on the neutral station, Harmony Point. 47 species had representatives in the Great Assembly Hall, their breathing apparatus and environmental suits of widely varied kinds creating a stream of hisses, clicks, and mechanical whirs. The Kethmori delegate, a colossal cephalopod-like being named Gluthmorin, activated the chamber's main screen. The tape displayed human after human leaping from ships, space platforms, even world surfaces, floating in the deadly vacuum with what seemed casual indifference. "Honored colleagues," declared Gluthmorin, his communications translator converting his subsonic talk into the regular language, "we are fighting something novel. Humanity itself has converted their reproductive cycle into a weapon. They're waging suicidal reproduction against us as a psychological warfare." The hall erupted in hushed whispers of awe and chattering agitation. The Velinary ambassador, a crystalline being that used language of light presentations, sent blazing orange flashes of alarm. Thane ambassadors, sturdy fight poets whose entire culture was a fighting code of honor, were visibly perturbed. "This is more than barbaric," declared General Kexthane, his forearms gesturing emphatically. "We have fought man in combat. We have seen their bravery, their military brilliance, their strange devotion to dying for other people. But this suggests they find death itself a recreational activity." While that was happening, however, Ambassador Catherine Reynolds, who was the human representative to the Galactic Council, was having the worst day of her diplomatic career. She had wasted most of 4 hours explaining the meaning of extreme sports, only to find that each explanation seemed to heap more confusion on top of confusion. "It's not reproduction," she repeated for the dozenth time. "It's maintenance. Humans perform extravehicular activities during normal ship operations. We've done that for over 3 centuries. But they smile. Gluthmorin cut in, replaying footage of Captain Morrison, grinning through his helmet as he was upside down with respect to his vessel and spot welding a plasma conduit. They display joy during what should be the most terror-inducing experience possible. This can only be due to reproductive euphoria." Catherine rubbed her temples, a headache building. "He's smiling because he does his job well. People smile when completing difficult work." "This is impossible," stated the Zephyrian delegate, a creature of pure energy who communicated through electromagnetic impulses. "No species can experience satisfaction facing certain death." "But that's the way it is," Catherine countered, her voice rising. "It's not certain death. We've designed the technology and training to make the EVA safe and a normal occurrence." This statement induced what could only be termed a diplomatic incident. General Thane sprang to his feet so rapidly his ceremonial armor clattered against his chair. "You term voluntary exposure to vacuum safe. With the right training and gear, yes." The chamber fell silent. And then, slowly, the Velinary delegate began to flash a bright, disturbed purple. Color spread through the other members of his delegation, and soon the entire Velinary delegation of the Assembly was ablaze with the light of existential terror. "They've beaten back death itself," panted the Velinary chief spokesman, his translated words barely more than a whisper. "They've made the unconquerable, the everyday." The ramifications of the discovery rocked known space at faster than hyperspace speeds. Within a few weeks, human space was under quarantine. Trade corridors that had flourished for centuries were sealed. Diplomats were recalled. The entire galaxy appeared to be waiting with bated breath to see what was next for the death-defying human race. Economic shock first hit the frontiers. Cities like Kepler Station, a backwoods trade hub which stretched human and alien space, found their alien benefactors simply gone. Administrator Commander Lisa Park stared at her screens in shock as ship after ship altered course to avoid human space. "This is nuts," she told her deputy, Chief Engineer Tom Bradley, as they read through the latest shipping dispatches. "We've lost 70% of our traffic in 2 weeks." Tom, a Rim War veteran who had earned his stripes by conducting combat EVA repairs amidst a hail of enemy bullets, couldn't help but laugh. "Let me get this straight. They're afraid of us because we can work in vac. Apart, evidently, they believe we give birth by catapulting ourselves into space." "Well," Tom said, buckling his tool belt, "I've got to run out and fix the cum array. Should I not look too happy about it?" Laughter died on their lips when they realized the depth of the crisis. Kepler Station was not merely a trade post, but a home to 50,000 human beings and aliens who had built their lives on the foundation of interspecies coexistence. Alien husbands were deserting their human husbands and fleeing to their homeworlds. Youngsters who had grown up in the cosmopolitan environment of the frontier were separated overnight from half their fellows. Station Chief Medical Officer Dr. Priya Sharma stood idly by and watched her Thane surgeons bundle their personal belongings with a mix of sadness and frustration. "Rextel," she addressed the surgeon who had spent 7 years working alongside her. "You can't seriously believe I'm some kind of death cultist." Rextel, his typical air of arrogance relaxed by obvious pain, could not bring himself to look at her. "I've watched the tapes, Priya. I've watched human beings launch themselves into space with smiles on their faces. How can I reconcile that with the coworker I know? Because it's not what you think it is. Priya's voice echoed through the medical bay. Is it that I worship at the altar of disease when I grin through a difficult procedure? Is it that Tom is a spokesman of radiation poisoning when he grins through a repair of the reactor? But Rexdal was gone already, leaving nothing but the faint scent of ozone that was the mark of his people's passage. Things were made worse by videos spreading on unofficial channels. Social media throughout the galaxy were congested with unedited videos of individuals performing EVA operations. Decontextualized, cut-down videos were being shared everywhere with more hysterical captions. A survival rescue by emergency medical technician Riley Foster of survivors from a damaged passenger liner was reworked as human death priest harvests souls in vacuum ritual. Film of maintenance man Carlos Mendez replacing a defective sensor. A ray by whistling was reworked as human warrior performs sacred void dance before battle. Most damaging of these videos was a training film of the Earth Space Academy. In it, a contingent of cadets were featured on their initial lever EVA training, smiling and joking around whilst training to work in zero gravity. In human eyes, it was a group of young people having a unique, difficult experience. In alien eyes, it looked children being indoctrinated for a death cult. Academy EVA. Instructor Captain Jessica Stone was in the middle of an interstellar tempest she could never have imagined. With a dozen years of teaching EVA procedures, over 3,000 cadets trained, and not a single loss of a student, Stone's safety record was impeccable, her methods proven and seasoned, and her dedication to her students unquestionable. That was all beside the point when the Galactic Council issued a formal statement, calling all human EVA training preparation for ritualistic species suicide. "This is everything I've done in my whole career," Jessica told the emergency hearing convened by Space Defense Force Commander of Earth Admiral Patricia Wells. "All these methods I teach, all these safety protocols I demand, they're about people staying alive. How did we get to the place where being competent is a desire to be dead?" Admiral Wells, a veteran of a few dozen EVA jobs herself, understood the frustration, the problems, not our ability. "Captain, we've gotten so good at surviving in vacuum, other civilizations can't possibly comprehend it. To them, what we're doing can't be done. And so they're looking for causes which are compatible with their way of thinking. The pursuit of knowledge had some grand revelations concerning human psychology and human physiology. He, Dr. Michael Torres, a xenobiologist who was back on Earth, began to look at each human accounted for EVA operation for a pattern which could be used to explain alien fears. What he discovered took him by surprise. "We don't just exist in a vacuum," he said in front of a packed auditorium at the Global Science Conference. "We excel. Our stress hormones during an extravehicular work period have patterns typical of what psychologists refer to as flow state, an ideal match of challenge and skill, which produces peak performance and satisfaction." He advanced to his next slide, which showed brain scans of EVA workers. "This is Captain Morrison's brain activity during a repair of the dream. Take a look at the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, dopamine circuits. He's not just not afraid, he's enjoying himself." The crowd murmured in shock, but not quite finished yet was Dr. Torres. "This is where it gets very interesting. We pitted these patterns against other species doing the same tasks. Our test subjects for the Keth-Mori test had gigantic stress reactions, fight or flight, and in 2 cases, complete psychological breakdown. Veterinary subjects could not even understand the concept without entering a trance of meditation." "What does it mean?" asked Dr. Wei, an evolutionary biologist from the Martian colonies. "It means we're not just better at other species at performing EVA work. We're the only species that can handle vacuum exposure normally. We consider what we're doing for regular ship maintenance. They find supernatural. This discovery ought to have relaxed tensions, yet had quite the opposite effect. The fear of the alien community turned to something very like religious awe. If human beings were not only to survive, but to experience delights which would be lethal for any other race, what must that make them? They got their answer from a most unlikely source. A joint human-Thane expedition to the Kepler belt that had dispatched human and Thane archaeologists to study the remains of a dead culture. Headed by expedition chief archaeologist Dr. Elizabeth Chen, they were studying hieroglyphs inscribed on an asteroid when their Thane counterpart, a scholar Dexcalar, remarked most surprisingly, "These glyphs," Dexcalar said, his voice reverent, "these speak of beings who could pass between worlds unprotected. In the ancient inscriptions, they are void dancers, mythic beings who could live in the in-between spaces." Elizabeth lifted her gaze from her translation slate. Void dancers. That does sound like just like those who undertake EVA work, Dexcalar summed up. Elizabeth, what if your race wasn't just randomly proficient at vacuum work? What if this is a trait that was selected for 1,000,000 years ago? The ramifications were mind-boggling. Scientific teams throughout human space set about reanalyzing the fossil record to see whether they could find signs of past exposure to vacuum or low-pressure conditions. What they discovered transformed consensus about human evolution. Dr. Sarah Kim, working with a team of xenobiologists on Luna, discovered at the molecular level human lung adaptations for rapid pressure equalization. They were not new mutations, nascent, programmed deep in human genetic code. We found similar adaptations in the bones of the Neanderthals, she reported at a press conference broadcast throughout the galaxy, and in Homo erectus remains. This trait dates back at least 2,000,000 years. The discovery galvanized an entire sector of research, evolutionary void adaptation. Scientists theorize that initial human forebears could have had to face low-pressure situations during abrupt climate changes, asteroid impacts, or volcanism which had, for a period of time, reversed Earth's atmosphere. Millions of years down the line, those who could withstand these exposures transmitted their genetic material, but those who could not were eliminated from the gene pool. We actually evolved to survive in space, marveled Dr. Wei at a joint human-alien scientific symposium. Our entire species carries the genetic memory of lethal decompression events. This technological advancement ought to have normalized human EVA capabilities, yet it created a different dilemma. Since man was supposed to evolve for the purpose of surviving in vacuum, what was his ultimate fate? Its next meeting was one unlike any other in its past. In place of terror and outrage, the alien representatives evidenced a mixture of awe and fear that was more terrible in some way than their initial panic. "We have studied your data," declared Gluthmorin, the Kethmori delegate. "We have convened our most learned scholars, our most wise philosophers, our most gifted seers, and the decision is final." Ambassador Reynolds prepared herself for more allegations of death cults and reproduction rituals. "Humans aren't a natural species," Gluthmorin continued. "You're bringers of the next step in galactic evolution. You're what the universe is evolving into." The room was silent. Catherine Reynolds saw her meticulously prepared diplomatic responses disintegrate. This was not a criticism she could refute with numbers and statistics. With all due respect, she started hesitantly. "Humans are a natural species. We evolved on Earth, just like all other." No. Interruption was provided by the Velinary delegate, his essence flashing with fierce blues and whites. "Vacuum frightens natural species. Natural species die in space. Natural species must be protected from the void. You don't. Post-natural. You're what's next." The philosophical implications created a shockwave throughout known space. Religions sprouted overnight, worshipping man as an evolutionary prophet. Scientific circles were polarized along divisive lines, some calling for wholesale exploration of human genetics, others calling for strict isolation until the implications could be evaluated. On the frontier, the immediate effects were dire and disastrous. Kepler Station was deprived of its final extraterrestrial inhabitants, and 50,000 human beings were marooned in what had now effectively become a ghost town. Supply vessels ceased to arrive. Communications back to the homeworld were irregular. Commander Lisa Park was alone in her abandoned command center, looking through the starfield, which was once crowded with ships of a dozen species. Now it was nothing more than empty space and the occasional human ship passing through. Status report, she called to her bare-bones crew. Cooking supplies are steady, reported Lieutenant Chen. We're running the hydroponic bays at full capacity. Water recycle is normal. Power generation is even higher than baseline because we're operating fewer systems. And morale. Chief Engineer Tom Bradley looked up from his maintenance schedule. Honestly, okay? As it turned out, we have some very resourceful people on board. The community mobilized it was. Without alien citizens, Kepler Station had come to be not unlike some frontier society of human history. People helped people. Trades were passed down without fee. Students who had spent time in interspecies educational establishments now learned. Under whomever had knowledge to teach, Dr. Sharma had converted her first aid room to a community center and was conducting first aid training for anyone interested. If we're stuck in quarantine, she was explaining to her trainees, we can at least be self-sufficient. The isolation would have continued indefinitely had a sudden crisis not arisen. Meridian's Pride supplies transport suffered a catastrophic engine breakdown on the outskirts of the quarantine zone on a mission to the outer colonies. 200 human and alien crew were doomed to certain death unless some emergency repairs were possible under the conditions of a radiation storm. The nearest aid was 3 days away, too far for the disabled vessel's life support to hold. But Kepler Station was only 6 hours away from the location of the Meridian's Pride. Commander Park was paged on the distress channel at the very moment. She was completing her morning coffee. The request was concise. Could Kepler send a repair team? The answer should have been simple too, but complicating factors were the presence of alien crew on board the Meridian's Pride. There was still a quarantine zone. Technically, no human ship was to approach vessels with alien passengers. Screw the quarantine, Tom Bradley said after Lisa set out the situation. They're gonna die, people. It can't be done that way, Tom. Breaking a quarantine can escalate the entire situation for all parties involved. That, or maybe it can teach them that we're the same human beings we've always been. Posited Dr. Sharma. Lisa looked at the tactical screen showing the location of Meridian's Pride. And Eva, in a radiation storm, would be very dangerous. Even with the best quality of gear and most experienced crew, a large number of casualties were likely. She chose something that would change everything. Tom, bring the repair crew to readiness. Dr. Sharma, get the sick be ready for potential damage. Chen, set course for the Meridian's Pride. Ma'am, Lieutenant Chen murmured the alien crew. They're going to see us operating in vacuum in the middle of a radiation storm. If they were scared before, that's when they'll discover what human beings are all about. It had cost 5 hours to travel to Meridian's Pride through some of the most dangerous space in the sector. Radiation storm was increasing. Electromagnetic storm was interfering with communications and navigation. When they arrived, conditions were graver still than they had apprehended. Meridian's Pride was leaking atmosphere through a number of hull breaches. Her engines were entirely out of commission, and her personnel were grouped in the ship's most heavily shielded sections, slowly exhausting their air supply. Meridian's Pride Captain Maria Santos greeted the rescue team with obvious relief. Thank God you're here. We have maybe 4 hours of air at most, and the radiation is killing electronics. Tom Bradley had his equipment already set out and was running diagnostics. What's the crew complement? It was 200 souls, half human, half alien. They're pretty scared. The aliens are. Lisa Park nodded. Understandable. They're about to see something that's going to challenge everything they think they know about human beings. This repair job was one of the most dangerous EVA tasks in human history. Due to the radiation storm, most electronics were not usable, thus having to be repaired by hand and by mechanical means. Visibility was minimal, comms were sporadic, and the radiation shielding on the suits was pushed to its very limits. All the time, the alien crewmen stood in reverent silence, watching the human beings manage the deadly world with workaday efficiency. Tom Bradley, fighting to replace a cut plasma conduit in the midst of fluctuating radiation levels surrounding him, could not help but grin as he finally was able to keep the link in place. "Got it," he called back through the radio. Section 7's plasma stream is re-established. On board the ship, a group of Thane traders watched the human engineers celebrate at his victory in a world that would have killed them in a matter of seconds. One of them, a veteran trader called Keth Moron, muttered a prayer in his native language. "He doesn't mind," his friend replied to Keth Moron. "He's having a great time." "It's impossible," replied Vrexcaler, but his voice was not the. Repairs had consumed 8 hours. By the time the last of the hull breaches was sealed and the engines were humming on full power again, each of the aliens on board had watched human beings achieve impossibilities by their psychology and biological standards. But above all, they had also seen something more. People jeopardizing their very existence for other people. No matter what their species was, Dr. Sharma, having donned his coveralls to aid in medical evacuations during repair operations, was face to face with Vrextal, her former co-worker on Kepler Station. He had been a member of the medical staff on the Meridian's Pride. Priya Vrextal said, his tone rich with emotion. "I have to apologize. I was so focused on what you were capable of. I forgot who you are, who I am. A lifesaver. A healer. A risker of his own life for the benefit of other people." Still waved them towards the viewport at human repair crews working away through a radiation storm. This is not about death or breeding or ritual. This is about life, about maintaining life. The Meridian's Pride rescue was a turning point for human-alien relations, quite the opposite of what was expected. Instead of setting human EVA capability on a par with normality, it elevated them to the ranks of legend. Within days, repair work tapes were being circulated throughout the galaxy. But now, things were different. These were not bizarre death rituals or inexplicable reproduction rituals. These were individuals jeopardizing their own survival for the benefit of other people. The Galactic Dallas's Council had called a special meeting, but its tone was entirely other than it had in the past. Ambassador Reynolds was not greeted by accusation and fear, but by something very like reverence. "We have never seen anything like this before," declared Gluth Morin. "We have beheld human beings employ their supernatural gifts, not for aggression or mastery, but for deliverance and preservation. They're not supernatural gifts," Catherine protested, but her refutation was gentle. "They're acquired skills which were perfected through centuries of necessity." "Indeed," said the Velinary delegate, flashing thoughtful greens and gold. "But the application is the willingness to risk individual survival for the greater good. That is not common throughout the stars." Perception shifted dramatically, but along with it came some new problems. Rather than being feared death cultists, human beings were now celebrated saviors. Applications for human rescue teams came pouring in from all parts of the galaxy. Every human who had training for EVA suddenly had a demand on his services, as an emergency responder, Captain Jessica Stone, whose training videos were at the center of the original furor, was at the center of a new phenomenon. Alien species requesting human EVA training. "That's not possible," she said to a group of Keth Mori engineers. "Your race does not have the physiological characteristics necessary for working in a vacuum. Your blood would actually boil." "Then teach us to build better suits," was the answer of Chief Engineer Glutov. "Teach us to think like human beings in vacuum." The necessity gave birth to a technological breakthrough in EVA. Human engineers, working together with alien designers, created new kinds of environmental suits that could protect non-human physiologies against vacuum. On its own, the derived equipment was more sophisticated and bulkier than human EVA suits. But it opened a whole class of new possibilities of interspecies cooperation. Much more important, however, was that it created a new understanding of what was distinctive to humankind. It was not that they were post-natural or precursors to evolution. Instead, it was that they had developed, through evolutionary happenstance and survival need, a set of capacities useful to all. The quarantine of the area around human space was terminated. 6 months after the rescue of Meridian's Pride, McCain's medical ship under the command of Rextal and a group of alien physicians who volunteered their services to work alongside human medical staff was the first ship to journey into human space. While we can learn much from each other, Rextal told Dr. Sharma during their second meeting at Kepler Station's sickbay, "You've shown us that living through conditions that are unattainable is not defeating death, but sustaining life." The ancient station came back to life slowly as the returning alien inhabitants returned, and a steady stream of newcomers took their places. But the reconstituted society was of a different character from what had existed before. There was a reformed appreciation, a deeper respect for other species' weaknesses and strengths. Children, who had grown during the isolation, had learned to take care of themselves in ways their parents had never dreamed of. Adults who had had to rely on each other had formed bonds that transcended species. Everyone had been changed by the disaster. Commander Lisa Park gazed out from her command center at the steady line of ships entering and leaving Kepler Station. As before, the starfield was packed with ships from a few dozen species. But something was different now. Human-alien crews piloting vessels together on endeavors which had not been possible before. "Status report," she called to her staff. "Eyes normal. All systems normal," LT Chen reported. "The traffic control is taking the additional strain without a problem. The new EVA training complex is looking full busy for the next 6 months, and morale." Chief Engineer Tom Bradley looked up from his desk, grinning. Better than ever. Turns out being called on is a very good thing. That was Tom's proposal for the EVA training complex. Why not publicize human vacuum capabilities instead of keeping them a secret? The complex trained everything from basic EVA familiarity for observer aliens to complex joint operations for multi-species crews. Most subscribed course was Vacuum Psychology by Dr. Michael Torres. This helped alien crewmen to better understand what human beings were experiencing in their activities during EVA, which reduced fear and increased coordination. "The thing that tips the scales," explained his latest class of alien students, Dr. Torres, "is that men aren't cowardly in a vacuum. We possess the same survival instincts as does every other species. We are different in that we have conditioned ourselves to channel those instincts for concentrated effort rather than for panic." One veterinary student throbbed with interested yellow. "But the tapes show man enjoying himself, working on an EVA. How can you reconcile survival urge with enjoyment? While survival and enjoyment are not mutually exclusive. Overcoming a tough situation is a survival mechanism for human beings. And a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction kicks in. The tougher the situation, the greater the sense of satisfaction." This rationale was more attractive to the extraterrestrial students than sheer physiology had been. Each species was cognizant of the concept of attainment and reward, even if their species utilized it for other endeavors. The training program was a success, which spawned some unintended developments. Manned human-alien EVA crews addressed projects which were beyond the ability of each race by itself, combining human vacuum tolerance and alien technological expertise, created a whole new line of frontiers for exploration and space development. Its most grandiose project was the construction of Deep Space Station Harmony, a joint scientific facility in the vacuous region between star systems. Its purpose was to be a headquarters for exploration of the most barren conditions of the universe, crewed by men trained to work together regardless of their biological differences. Captain Jessica Stone was handpicked to be in charge of the station's EVA operations team, taking preparations for the first construction mission. She reflected on everything that had occurred since those initial panic reports of human death rituals. "Ready for a day at the office again?" Tom Bradley asked, having just been made chief of engineers at the station. Jessica looked out at the empty space where the station was to be built, then at the cross-species human-alien construction team who were to build it. "You know what, Tom? I think it's going to be fun." Construction of Harmony Station took 18 months and involved EVA crews of 12 species. Humankind was involved in the most dangerous vacuum work. But alien engineers brought innovations which spurred construction on and made it safer than anyone could have imagined. When the station opened its doors, representatives of all significant species throughout the galaxy came for the opening ceremony. Diplomatic liaison for the station, Ambassador Catherine Reynolds, observed crews of other worlds working next to each other in flawless unison. "Citizens of the world and honored guests," she said to the crowd, "we're not only commemorating the finishing of a space station today, we're celebrating something more profound, which is that difference strengthens us." They were interrupted by a breaking news story. A colony ship with refugees from a dying world had suffered critical damage on the galaxy's outskirts. The ship carried 50,000 of a race of beings who had never encountered human beings before. "Distance?" asked Captain Stone. "For 47 hours," replied the navigation officer. "However, Captain, the vessel is dead center in a dark matter region. Any exterior work would be impractical for most species." Stone looked around at her ragtag team. Males who could abide by conditions beyond human potential. Beings who could envision remedies for complaints men could not even perceive. Technicians who had disciplined themselves to trust each other amidst biological variation. "Not for us," she answered. "All units stand by for emergency mobilization." This rescue mission was the most complex operation in the history of the temporary station. The area around the refugee ship was a region of gravitational anomalies, which was not passable by regular space. Vacuum conditions randomly swung between normal and near absolute zero. Radiation levels randomly spiked. It was exactly the sort of environment where human EVA capabilities were critical. Operating in cooperative, mixed human-alien crews, rescue teams managed to stabilize the refugee ship and transfer its passengers. 36 consecutive hours of work under conditions lethal for most forms of life was needed for the operation. But the ultimate moment of truth was reached by the captain of the refugee vessel, who was an alien who had not met human beings before watching the rescue operation itself. "What kind of beings are these?" the captain queried Ambassador Reynolds while human crews repaired his ship's hull. "They're human beings," replied Catherine. "They're, proficient at mending things in space, but they work in the vacuum as if it were their natural habitat. For them, it kind of is." The captain watched a human engineer smile through, finishing a very difficult repair. "They find happiness in survival. They derive happiness from the survival of others." That fleeting contact reiterated 1,000,000 times through the galaxy by the spread of news of the rescue was the final transformation of the manner other worlds regarded humankind. Gone was the fear. Fading was the religious awe. Remaining was respect for a race which had made its own ultimate strength a vehicle for helping other beings. The refugees of the dying world settled on Deep Space Station Harmony, thereby creating the first real multi-species society of the galaxy. They brought their experience of stellar engineering, which was supported by human, EVA know-how, and alien technology. Dr. Priya Sharma, who was then Chief Medical Officer of the station, watched the newcomers learn to live in the void by observing their human neighbors. Children of a dozen other species played around the recreational facilities of the station, gaining an awareness that biological distinctions weren't equivalent to distinctions of worth. Status report. Commander Park inquired during her weekly tour of inspections. "All systems running in normal range," reported Dr. Sharma. "The newcomers are settling well. We have had no major medical emergencies, and the psychological adjustment schemes are working very well. No problems with mixed crews, just the opposite. The teams are performing better than anyone could have imagined. You see, human capacity for adaptation in conjunction with otherworldly cleverness produces results that neither race could have come up with on its own. Its success gave birth to other endeavors throughout the galaxy. Mixed crews were adopted on dangerous operations. Alien engineers and human EVA individuals tackled those which had remained insuperable. The Kethmori, who had themselves sparked the whole Fasco with their frenzied dispatches concerning human funeral rites, became man's most dedicated allies. Their ocean world became the ultimate training grounds for men who wished to learn about extremes. And Kethmori men came to be expert at designing equipment which could function at the air suffocation depths of space, the Velenair, who by virtue of their communications through light had proven themselves natural coordinators, assumed the galaxy's premier mission planning. They were capable of conceptualizing complex EVA operations in terms that would allow human crews to understand the hazards involved. Even the Thane warriors, who were typically proud, had a new meaning working among human beings. Their sense of honor and bravery was perfectly translated to the perilous space rescue and exploration. 5 years after the first whispers of human explosive decompression recreation, the galaxy had been transformed. What had first been a crisis of understanding had flourished into a revolution of cooperation. The annual Galactic Safety Conference, convened on board Deep Space Station Harmony, ushered in the new reality. Human and extraterrestrial engineers co-authored on safety of EVA. Composite crews exercised rescue operations, and adolescent entities of some several dozen species trained in unison in simulated vac conditions. Captain Jessica Stone, currently Director of Galactic EVA Operations, stood before the gathered delegates and took a moment to look back on the distance they had all traveled. 5 years ago, she started, "You all assumed human beings were crazy for jumps out of perfectly good vessels. Today, those same human beings stand right next to your crews to gaze at the cosmos the way we never would have dreamed of looking at it." The great audience of human and other beings who had trained themselves to work past their biological prejudices applauded with a sound that was a third applause, a third harmony, and a third electromagnetic current, the consensual agreement of a dozen species. "It's a dangerous universe," continued Jessica. "Vacuum kills, radiation kills, gravity kills, temperature kills. But through collaboration, we've learned we don't run away from danger. We control it through preparation, through the right equipment, through having the right people around you." She waved through the viewport at construction teams busy building the most recent expansion for the station. Humankind in EVA suits toiled alongside Kethmori in pressure suits and Velenari through remote robots, their work being managed by Thane foremen, who revered safety protocols in much the same way they held Código de Honor. "What you're seeing out there is not human beings performing the miraculous," Jessica stated. "It's people performing what needs to be done. We're just doing it in a safe manner now." The gathering was adjourned by a demonstration that would have been ridiculous. Some years earlier, a joint human-alien cooperative, EVA, training exercise involving crews of 5 distinct species working together to set up an elaborate construction in vacuo. The human crews handled the direct,